It all started in the living room of our big fancy suburban house. Let me introduce myself first. I am Lex, a teenager who is totally obsessed with motorcycles, speed, and a bit of trouble. That morning, I was stuck sitting on the sofa, sandwiched right between my parents while a heavy, itchy cast wrapped all the way up my right leg. My mom was pacing up and down, scolding me furiously. I looked down at my cast, wondering how long this lecture was going to take, thinking they were supposed to be taking care of me, not torturing me. Suddenly, my mom stopped and yelled that starting that very day, she was locking my phone and my laptop away. Losing my screens meant total isolation, but luckily my dad jumped in, telling her she was being too cruel and asking if a broken leg was not enough punishment. Of course, that only made things worse. My mom snapped, shouting that he did not deserve to have a say in this at all. She screamed that if he hadn't bought me that death trap of a motorbike, I would still be completely fine. My dad scoffed, sarcastically apologizing for making sure his daughter didn't grow up to be completely boring like her mother. I just sat there helplessly as the familiar spectacle unfolded. Another lecture about my irresponsibility had quickly turned into a bitter quarrel between the two of them instead. They only stopped when my mom checked the time and realized she needed to leave for her business trip to Egypt. She announced she was done arguing because she had a flight to catch, then warned me that she would have her eyes on me the entire time. I rolled my eyes, asking sarcastically how she was going to do that all the way from Egypt, because it sounded pretty hard to me. She gave me one last stern look and stormed out. As the house went quiet, I took comfort in thinking that at least my dad was still here, so I wouldn't be completely by myself. The next morning, I limped down to the kitchen, smelling the faint scent of yesterday's leftover coffee. I froze when I saw a white note stuck to the shiny fridge door from my dad. He wrote that he was shooting his new movie in Spain for a few months, and that there was a strict no-phone policy to avoid leaks, so I shouldn't call unless it was an absolute emergency. I stared at the paper, feeling a cold knot in my stomach. Seriously? Choosing work over me again? That is exactly what you get when you have a world-famous actor for a dad and an award-winning photographer for a mom. They are rarely home, and whenever they actually are, they are constantly at each other's throat. Their absence was the whole reason I started hanging out with my biker gang. Motorcycles were my only true escape, but that passion was also exactly how I messed up my leg. I leaned against the counter, remembering the painful day of my accident. I could still picture myself sprawled on the hard, dusty ground with my heavy bike lying right beside me, while the other gang members just stood around staring. In my own defense, I knew I could totally nail that stunt and win their stupid bet if it wasn't for that unexpected bumpy patch on the road. What really hurt, though, was that not a single one of my so-called homies had checked on me since that day. Not even my boyfriend Blake had sent a single text. By afternoon, I was sitting up in my second-floor bedroom, looking out of my gigantic window. It was the start of summer vacation, yet I could hardly move an inch, which was incredibly frustrating. Bored out of my mind, I decided to entertain myself by playing a game of candid camera on our whole quiet suburbia. I grabbed my mom's professional camera with its massive lens, feeling the cold weight of the metal in my hand. Peering through the viewfinder, I easily spied on the newlyweds Cunninghams on my right, the Carpenters on my left, and then I focused across the street on my childhood friend, Tiny Timmy. When the lens zoomed into his bedroom, my jaw dropped. Tim was working out on his bench press, his bare skin covered in glistening sweat. I honestly thought some random hunky guy had just moved into the neighborhood. Tiny Timmy had officially grown into Timothy. He was suddenly tall, had a perfect six-pack and beautiful wavy curly hair, looking just like a muscular version of Timothée Chalamet. I let out a dreamy sigh, but right then, Tim suddenly sat up and looked straight toward my window. We made direct eye contact, and my heart skipped a beat in pure awkwardness. Thinking fast, I grabbed a thick notebook, wrote in big letters that he was looking good, handsome, and held it up against the glass. Through my camera lens, I saw him read it and flash a warm, beautiful smile. Then he started writing something back. I giggled and squinted my eyes to read his paper, which said that he looked even better up close. I felt my cheeks get hot and quickly fanned myself, thinking that was incredibly bold of him. I wanted to tease him back, so I held up another page saying his reply was sorry but lame. Tim looked confused for a second, so I pointed down at the heavy cast on my leg. The moment he saw it, his eyes went wide with surprise, and he instantly turned around and dashed out of his room. I sighed, muttering to myself that a broken leg was enough to scare him off, and that he was the one who was truly lame. Suddenly, the loud sound of the doorbell echoed through the house. I struggled down the stairs, and when I pulled the heavy front door open, Tim was standing right there on the porch, breathing a bit heavily. He grinned and told me that it took a while. My eyes widened in shock as I asked him what he was doing here. He chuckled, explaining that of course he came, because I obviously needed a closer look, and it looked like I could use a hand or maybe a leg. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. In a playful, high-pitched voice, I told him to come inside and help a poor damsel in distress, striking a dramatic, helpless pose that made him burst out laughing. From that afternoon on, Tim came over to my house every single day to help me out with everything. He was incredibly sweet, even trying to ride my motorcycle around the block so the engine wouldn't sit idle for too long, though I couldn't help but giggle watching him struggle with the heavy machine. Besides his new bulked-up body, he was still the exact same goofy friend I knew back in the day. We spent hours laughing, playing fast-paced video games, and watching movies together in the living room. During one of our movie nights, we were scrolling through a streaming app on the television when I saw a title I loved. I pointed at the screen and told him he absolutely had to watch Bodies because the plot was completely nuts. Tim smiled and countered, saying he actually thought I might be into Lady Bird because it was such a heartwarming coming-of-age story. I twisted my face in pure disgust, groaning out an absolute no way. Tim just smirked and told me that Timothée Chalamet was in it. A massive smile broke across my face and I immediately agreed, saying I was totally sold. But then I asked him how on earth he knew that would sway my opinion so easily. Tim looked at me knowingly, stating that he just knew me, just like he knew that I spied on him from time to time, which he jokingly added was super creepy. I just smiled cheekily, thinking to myself that he was a totally shy guy who intentionally left his bedroom blinds wide open while working out anyway. One morning, Tim and I were hanging out in my living room. He was on the floor doing push-ups, and I was casually sitting on his back to add weight. Suddenly, the front door burst open, and my boyfriend Blake marched in with his eyes glued to his phone. He was loudly shouting about a racing tournament in the Upper West Side, but when he finally looked up, his jaw dropped. Seeing me on another guy's back made him furious, and he demanded to know what was going on. I stayed completely unbothered, slid off Tim's back, and casually introduced them. Blake angrily stepped toward Tim, demanding to know what he thought he was doing. I quickly told Blake to watch his tongue, reminding him that he had ignored me for weeks and didn't even remember that I had a broken leg. Blake stammered, but then defensively yelled that I belonged to him anyway. Fuming like a bull, he raised his fist to punch Tim, but his hand was stopped dead in midair. Tim had caught Blake's fist with a rock-solid, emotionless grip. The moment Tim let go, a defeated Blake turned around and fled. I scoffed at what a coward he was and apologized to Tim, who was surprisingly cool about it. He asked how Blake and I had even become a thing. I explained sarcastically that I used to think he was cool because he led a biker gang, but I never expected it to last, just like my parents' marriage. Tim's face fell, and he sadly shared that his own dad had left his mom for another woman last year. Hearing that, I felt a wave of sympathy, thinking that being stuck at home wasn't so bad since we could catch up on real things. The next morning, however, a flash of blonde hair across the street caught my eye. I grabbed my camera and zoomed in on Tim's yard. It was a girl named Annabelle returning a hoodie to him. I felt a sharp pang of annoyance. She was giggling uncontrollably, tossing her hair, and purposefully touching his arm while he just stood there. That evening, the moment Tim walked into my bedroom, I demandingly asked who the blonde was and what she was doing at his place. Tim looked totally surprised and asked who I meant. I snapped that she might look like strawberry shortcake, but he shouldn't be fooled because whatever love they thought they had would soon turn sour. Tim just burst out laughing, wiping away a tear. When I angrily asked what was so funny, he asked what made me think that way when I didn't even know her. I told him to see the truth for himself, grabbed my camera, and showed him the neighborhood secrets I'd uncovered. I pointed out that the couple at number 9 were both having an affair. The daughter at number 11 was using her boyfriend to hide her relationship with a girl, and the seemingly perfect Carpenters were miserable because of the husband's drinking. I triumphantly concluded that there was no such thing as real love. Tim nodded but smiled softly, saying that genuine love did exist. He gently aimed the camera toward the Cunninghams, showing them cuddled up by candlelight, feeding each other popcorn. I narrowed my eyes suspiciously, still not buying their perfect act. A few afternoons later, Tim told me he had to work overtime at the library to prepare for an event with, you guessed it, nobody else but Annabelle. A hot surge of jealousy hit me, but I forced myself to hide my anger as I watched him drive off with that blonde barb. Feeling completely restless, I decided to peek through my camera at the Cunningham. It was so annoying seeing them look so lovey-dovey, happily reading a book together. I tried to take my mind off Tim, but the more I stared, the more I imagined that the couple in my lens was Tim and Annabelle. Frustrated, I slammed the camera down. That was when my eyes landed on a library book Tim had borrowed from me. A little smirk crept onto my face as I realized it was the perfect excuse to follow him. By evening, I took an Uber to the library. Limping inside, I paused in utter confusion because the place was packed with people. I wondered why Tim had claimed they would be entirely alone. Suddenly, I spotted him, and the moment he saw me, his face twisted into an expression of pure shock, like that famous painting, The Scream. I cheerfully announced that he shouldn't mind me because I was just there to return my book. Tim frowned, looking stressed, and muttered that I should have just given it to him. I let out a sarcastic chuckle, saying I could clearly see he was way too busy with Annabelle. Annabelle blinked, asking how I knew her name. I coldly replied that she simply reminded me of that creepy horror doll who was also an absolute nightmare. As she gasped in shock, Tim immediately grabbed my arm and dragged me away. I secretly smirked, loving that he chose to focus on me instead of her. However, our fun was cut short the second we stepped outside. Blake was standing right there on the sidewalk, glaring at Tim and darkly announcing that it was time for him to pay. Tim didn't hesitate. He immediately stepped in front of me to shield my body. But Blake just smirked and let out a loud, sharp whistle, signaling for a whole group of his biker goons to step out from the shadows. Outnumbered, I panicked and pleaded with Blake to be civilized so we could sort this out without violence. Blake chuckled, proposing that we settle the entire thing with a bet instead. He explained that whoever could pull off the exact motorcycle trick that broke my leg, topped off with an Akira slide, would win me fair and square. I snapped at him, yelling that I was not some trophy and that the stunt was incredibly dangerous. I turned to Tim for backup, but Tim just stared at Blake and calmly said it sounded worth it to him. I screamed, asking if both of them had lost their mind. Tim went first. He flunked the landing but miraculously rolled away without a scratch. Blake went next, but he completely lost control and landed flat on his face. It was such an embarrassing fiasco that the rest of the gang quickly roared away into the night. Even though we were safe, I was boiling with rage. I marched up to Tim, sarcastically congratulating him on winning absolutely nothing. Then I turned my back and stormed off to call a ride, leaving a confused Tim behind. It wasn't that I didn't care about him, I just couldn't stand his foolish recklessness anymore. The next morning, the loud ringing of the doorbell woke me up. I limped downstairs, opened the door, and found Tim standing there looking nervous. In an annoyed voice, I asked him what he was here for. Tim stammered, apologizing for the night before. He explained that if I had stayed longer, he could have told me that he did what he did because he liked me in a romantic way. He admitted he couldn't remember when it started, but he remembered how sad he was when we stopped hanging out. And he even started working out just to impress me. My mind went totally blank. It turned out nothing was going on between him and Annabelle. They were just co-workers, and he had invented the story about being alone at the library just to see my reaction. Tim looked at me expectantly, asking what I thought and promising he could make me believe in love. I shook my head, telling him not to be ridiculous because love wasn't like the movie, but just a temporary chemical reaction in the brain. Tim pleaded with me to just give it a chance. I refused, telling him to look at my parents, his father, and all the broken families in our neighborhood. I told him his feelings would fade, just like mine did with Blake. Tim's voice broke as he apologized for wasting my time, saying he thought he was special enough for me to take a leap of faith, but now he knew he was wrong. He left without another word, and when I saw his bedroom blinds close across the street, a sharp sting hit my chest. Late that afternoon, I sat on my front door steps, feeling completely uneasy without him. I wanted to make it up, but I didn't know how. My chest tightened even more when I saw him talking to Annabelle outside his house, looking happy and smiling. By evening, I was back at my bedroom window, feeling miserable. I kept telling myself love wasn't real, and that the perfect Cunninghams were just faking. I picked up my camera to spy on them, but suddenly I saw a huge fight break out. The husband punched the wall in a rage and pushed his wife out of view. Then a massive commotion echoed across the yard, glass smashing and furniture crashing noises. Panicked, I called the cops right away. After hanging up, a twisted sense of victory hit me. Their marriage really was a sham. I excitedly limped across the street, dragged Tim over to the Cunninghams' front lawn, and waited. But when the cops arrived, the couple answered the door perfectly fine. It turned out they knew I was spying on them and staged the whole violent fight as a prank to teach me a lesson. They wrapped their arms around each other and laughed at me while the entire neighborhood gathered to watch. I facepalmed in total humiliation, but the absolute worst part was seeing the pure disappointment on Tim's face. He looked at me and told me I had to stop being so stubborn because not every family was like mine. I stood there with a deeply guilty expression, unable to say a single word, even when the cops gave me a stern warning. That night, I tossed and turned in my bed as Tim's words about taking a leap of faith kept wiggling around my mind. Suddenly, a flashing light across the street caught my attention. I sat up, grabbed my camera, and saw several dark shadows with flashlights creeping around Tim's house. My heart jumped into my throat. I tried calling Tim, but he was fast asleep. Calling the cops was completely useless too, because the dispatcher just yelled at me, thinking I was pulling another prank. Panicked, I decided to handle it myself. I grabbed an air horn, gripped my crutch, and limped across the street as fast as I could. Standing on Tim's front lawn, my heart was beating like crazy. I screamed at the top of my lungs that there were thieves. The startled intruders whipped around, so I blared the air horn and yelled at them to freeze and put their hands over their head. But being a teenager with a massive leg cast, I never actually expected criminals to just stand still. They rushed forward and tackled me to the ground. Just when I thought my life was over, Tim's voice shattered the darkness, screaming at them to get away from me. Thank goodness he woke up. Other neighbors rushed out to help hold the thieves down, and Tim's mom, Mrs. Jones, quickly helped me up. Tim called the cops, and this time they arrived immediately. Phew, the whole thing was absolutely insane. After things settled down, we went into Tim's living room. Mrs. Jones thanked me and invited me to stay the night. She burst out laughing uncontrollably when I awkwardly explained the fake fight situation with the Cunninghams, leaving me embarrassed and Tim completely mortified. When Tim went to grab us some drinks, his mom gently asked why I was all alone in this condition. I opened up and spilled everything about my broken family. Her expression turned into deep sympathy. She shared that love didn't always have a happy ending, but that didn't mean it wasn't real. She smiled softly, explaining that she and Tim's dad used to have genuine feelings, but things simply changed over time. She added that she wouldn't change a thing, because that relationship gave her Tim, the second real love of her life. Her words hit me completely differently, making me realize I had given love a bad name. I admitted she was right, and that love itself was not at fault. I told her Tim was lucky to have her, whereas my parents just bickered and put all their anger on me, adding that I bet even tonight's incident wouldn't make them care. Mrs. Jones gently stroked my hair, suggesting I give it a try anyway because their reactions might surprise me. So I called them. Guess what? They both sounded completely terrified and concerned, promising to come home as soon as possible. Mrs. Jones smiled warmly, saying everything was going to be all right now, and asked Timmy to show me where I'll be sleeping. Tim led me to the guest room and started setting up a spare mattress. He remarked that what I did out there was really brave, especially considering my leg situation. I hesitated for a second, looking down at my feet, and quietly told him I wouldn't have risked my life if it wasn't for a specific reason. Tim smiled cheekily, saying he was all ears. I looked into his eyes and confessed I did it for him. I told him I was sorry for overreacting, explaining that the thought of us becoming a bitter old couple had bugged me, but I realized we could be happy like the Cunninghams instead. I looked at him expectantly, asking if that sounded too bad. Tim smiled sweetly, murmuring that he guessed not, and pulled me into a warm embrace. The next morning, the bright summer sun filtered through the guest room window, and I woke up to my parents' call. They actually kept their promise this time. Within an hour, both my mom and dad arrived at Tim's house to pick me up, and we all walked back home together. As we walked, my mom softly explained that she had genuinely thought my dad was staying home to take care of me, while my dad admitted he had absent-mindedly assumed my mom only left for Egypt in a fit of anger and was going to return in a couple of days. Hearing this, a weight lifted off my chest. I realized that they really did care about me. They just had a completely terrible way of showing. They had forced themselves to stay together all these years thinking it was what was best for me, but the unending tension and bitter bickering had just been eating us all up from the inside. Thankfully, this crazy incident finally opened their eyes, and they calmly agreed to get a peaceful divorce while still looking after me together as a team. A few weeks later, I was finally free from that heavy leg cast, but honestly, I felt even more liberated on the inside than on the outside. Tim and I went out for a ride, and as the engine roared, he drove my motorcycle smoothly down the open road while I sat closely behind him, wrapping my arms tightly around his waist as we headed straight into the beautiful sunset. The warm wind hit my face, and I couldn't help but wonder if this feeling was the power of my newfound belief in love, or if it was because I finally realized that love had actually been around me all along. I am still not entirely sure myself, but honestly, who cares? Alex and Timothy, signing off.